The wind carried a sound that wasn't quite a howl, not quite a cry, something between grief and warning. The white plain stretched endless, swallowing fence posts, graves, and dreams under its shroud of snow. A single figure moved against that void, hunched beneath a torn cloak, boots breaking through the frozen crust. Her name was Evelyn Carter, though the land had long since stopped caring for names. Her breath came in shallow ghosts. The wind took each exhale and scattered it to nowhere. Beneath her layers of threadbare fabric, her ribs pressed sharp against skin gone pale as frost. 5 days. That's how long it had been since anything worth chewing had passed her lips. She had kept count at first, days since her husband died, since the last can of beans, since the last knock on her cabin door. But time loses its edges when you're starving. All that remains is the rhythm of footsteps and the ache behind your eyes. She crested a small ridge where a willow stood, half buried in white. The branches drooped low, brittle, skeletal. Beneath it lay a wooden cross. The wind had stripped the letters from the grave marker, but she still traced them with a trembling hand. Jacob Mercer. Her husband. She knelt there, though she could no longer cry. The tears had frozen in her long before the storm came. "Guess you left me good and proper," she whispered, voice cracking. "You and your promises." The sound of her words vanished into the snow. When she tried to rise, her knees buckled. She caught herself on the wooden cross, splinters digging into her palms. The world tilted, swaying like a lantern flame in the wind. She pressed her forehead to the ground. The snow bit her skin. She stayed there until her breathing slowed to nothing more than a shallow tremor. If death came, she thought it would be a relief, soft, quiet, merciful. But death was not what found her. A shape moved at the edge of her fading sight. Tall, dark, human perhaps. The storm blurred its outline until it seemed carved from the very wind. For a moment she thought it was Jacob, come to fetch her from this half-life. But as the figure drew near, she saw the truth. The man was not white. He moved like shadow and silence, each step deliberate. His hair was long, black as obsidian, tied back with rawhide. His chest was bare despite the cold, the skin bronzed and marked with scars, some old, some newer. A necklace of bone hung against his collarbone, clinking softly with each breath. Evelyn's heart stuttered. Her body wanted to crawl backward, but she was too weak to move. The man knelt beside her without a word. His eyes, dark and unreadable, studied her face. He placed a hand against her forehead, then her wrist, checking for life the way one might test a trapped bird. She tried to speak, but only a whisper escaped. Don't hurt me." He said nothing. Instead, he slid his arms beneath her weightless frame and lifted her easily. The warmth of his skin startled her, the first human heat she'd felt in weeks. She wanted to fight, to resist, but her body surrendered before her will could form a command. The snow swallowed them as he carried her toward the hills. When Evelyn woke, the light was dim and flickering. The air smelled of smoke and pine. She was wrapped in furs, deer hide, soft and coarse. A fire snapped low nearby, throwing orange light across rough stone walls. For a moment she panicked, her mind clawing through fragments of memory, the storm, the grave, the man. Then she saw him. He sat near the fire, back straight, hands working over something in his lap, a piece of hide, stretched and scraped clean. His chest rose slow with each breath, unbothered by the cold that seeped into the stones. Evelyn tried to speak. The words tangled in her throat. He glanced over, not startled, just aware. His gaze met hers for a heartbeat, steady, unreadable, and then he returned to his work. Her voice came rough, small. "Where am I?" He didn't answer. Instead, he rose, moved to the other side of the hut, and returned with a small clay bowl. Inside was a thin broth, steam curling from it. He held it out. Evelyn stared at the bowl, then at him. "Why?" she whispered. Still nothing. Only the sound of the fire, the faint whistle of wind outside. Her hunger answered for her. She took the bowl with trembling hands, sipping cautiously. The broth was simple. Rabbit, maybe, with wild herbs, but it tasted like life itself. Tears welled unbidden. The man watched her eat, expression unchanged. When she finished, he slid a small piece of bread toward her. The crust was rough, uneven. She stared at it for a long moment before whispering, half to herself, "I haven't eaten in 5 days." For the first time, his voice broke the silence, deep, low, carrying something ancient in its tone. "Now you have." She looked up, startled by the weight of those words. They were plain, but they felt like a ceremony. He turned back to the fire, feeding it another log. She studied him, the way he moved with purpose, the calm in his stillness. He wasn't young but not yet old either. His shoulders bore the marks of a life spent outside mercy's reach. "You Apache?" she asked softly. He paused, nodded once. Her stomach twisted with the word. The old stories came to her: blood, raids, fires, warnings told by men who'd never seen the faces of those they feared. But this man didn't look like a story. He looked like a truth too complicated for fear to explain. "What's your name?" He hesitated, then spoke. "Taza." She repeated it, tasting the shape of it. "Taza." He met her gaze again, a flicker of something unreadable passing through his eyes, surprise maybe, or something quieter. The storm howled outside. Inside, the world had narrowed to firelight and silence. That night, she dreamt of the plains before the snow, when the sky burned gold at sunset and the wind carried dust instead of frost. She dreamt of laughter, her own, and the smell of cornbread cooling on the windowsill. Then the dream twisted into memory, her husband riding away to join a cattle drive, promising he'd be back by winter. He never returned. The fever took her first child that same month. When she woke, she was crying. The hut was dark except for the dying fire. She saw Taza asleep near the door, sitting upright, a rifle across his knees. She realized then he'd kept watch. The knowledge settled deep in her chest, strange and heavy. By dawn she could stand. She stepped outside, wrapping the fur tighter around her. The storm had eased, but the world was still white and endless. Taza emerged moments later, silent as breath. He carried a snare in one hand, a knife in the other. "You shouldn't go out there," she said. "It's..." He looked at her, calm. "I know this land." It wasn't arrogance, just fact. She nodded, stepping aside. Hours passed. She gathered herself, cleaned the small space, folded the fur she'd used. Her mind wrestled with questions she couldn't voice. Why help her? What did he want? When the door opened again, he carried 2 rabbits and a handful of kindling. Snow clung to his hair, glittering in the light. She took the rabbits from him, fingers brushing his for a moment. A small spark, human warmth, fleeting, unsettling, passed between them. She turned away quickly, throat tight. He said nothing, but his eyes lingered on her a little longer than before. That evening she tried to repay what she could. She cooked the rabbits, added snowmelt, stirred until the air filled with scent. When she handed him the bowl, he studied her with quiet surprise before accepting it. They ate in silence. At last she spoke. "There was a time I'd have never taken food from your hands." Taza didn't look up. "And now?" She hesitated. "Now I think maybe pride can starve a person faster than hunger." A faint, almost invisible smile touched his lips. "You learn fast." The moment hung there, soft as the falling snow. She wanted to ask him more, about his people, his scars, the stories etched into his skin, but something about the quiet between them felt sacred, not to be broken by curiosity. Instead she said, "Thank you. For saving me." He nodded once, eyes on the fire. "You were not meant to die in the cold." Her voice dropped. "How do you know that?" He stirred the fire, the flames reflecting in his gaze. "Because you are still here." She didn't understand it fully, but it settled deep, like a truth her bones already knew. Night came again, heavy with silence. The wind pressed against the walls, but inside the small hut the fire burned steady. Evelyn sat watching the flames, feeling her strength return bit by bit. Taza sat opposite her, sharpening his knife by the firelight. The rhythm of stone against steel was slow, even. "Do you live here alone?" she asked. He nodded. "Others gone. Long time." "Your family?" He paused. "Taken. Soldiers. Many winters ago." Her breath caught. She wanted to say she was sorry, but the words felt too small for that kind of loss. So she said nothing, only watched the light play across his face. The quiet between them grew warm instead of cold. For the first time in months, Evelyn felt something flicker inside her. A pulse of life, fragile but real. But the peace was thin, fragile as glass. Outside, somewhere beyond the ridge, a faint echo drifted on the wind. Horses maybe. Voices muffled by distance. Taza froze. His head turned toward the sound. Evelyn saw his expression harden, the shift from calm to alert. "What is it?" she whispered. He didn't answer, only reached for his rifle and stepped toward the doorway, eyes scanning the horizon through the falling snow. Far off, beyond the white veil, a faint column of smoke rose from the valley, the kind made by men, not nature. Evelyn's heartbeat quickened. "Are they?" He looked back at her, voice low, certain. "They are coming." And then the wind took his words and scattered them into the storm once more. The snow didn't stop for 3 more days. It fell in a slow, endless hush, as if the sky had grown tired of the world and meant to bury it quietly. Inside the small hut, the fire burned low, its glow painting the stone walls in amber and gold. Evelyn sat near it, mending a tear in her sleeve with thread pulled from the hem of her skirt. Her fingers were clumsy, still swollen from cold, but they moved with purpose. Survival, she was learning, was a craft of small, steady motions. Taza worked in silence beside her, carving a strip of bone into a fishing hook. Each stroke of his knife was careful, deliberate. The rhythm of his hands, the stillness of his eyes, it was a language older than speech. She found herself watching him the way one watches the tide, afraid to interrupt what feels eternal. When she finally spoke, it came soft, uncertain. "You always this quiet?" He didn't look up. "Quiet keeps you alive. Must be lonely." He paused for a heartbeat, then resumed carving. "Not when you know how to listen." The answer silenced her more than his silence had. Outside, the storm howled through the cracks in the rock, but inside, it was still, two lives breathing in rhythm, strangers bound by need. Days blurred together. They fell into a rhythm. He hunted, she cooked. He fixed the traps, she repaired what she could of the shelter. The snow began to thin, and sometimes faint light spilled through the small opening near the roof. When it did, Evelyn would stand beneath it, eyes closed, face tilted to the weak sun. She had forgotten what warmth felt like. Taza would watch her then, not out of desire but something deeper, recognition perhaps. She was a woman stripped bare of pretense, left with nothing but stubborn breath. He knew what that was. One evening she found him outside sharpening arrowheads. The light had turned copper, the kind of light that made the snow shimmer like spilled whiskey. She hesitated at the doorway, unsure if she was intruding, but he motioned for her to sit. She settled beside him. "You think the storm's over for good?" "For now," he said. "But storms always return." There was no bitterness in his tone, only acceptance. After a moment she asked, "You live out here alone. Don't you ever want to go back to your people?" He didn't answer right away. His hands stilled, eyes distant. "Most of my people are gone." She turned toward him. "Gone?" "Soldiers came. Took them south. The rest scattered. I stayed." Something in his voice, a quiet ache under the control, made her throat tighten. "Why?" His gaze drifted to the horizon. "Someone had to remember where we lived." The simplicity of it undid her. In that moment she understood the kind of loneliness that wasn't about being alone, it was about carrying ghosts. Inside the hut that night, she lit the fire while he sat near the door, always watching. The world outside their walls might have been empty, but she began to feel the weight of eyes in the dark. Paranoia, she told herself. The wind playing tricks. But Taza's stillness told her otherwise. "You think they're looking for me?" she asked. He nodded once. "White men don't forget what they think they own." Her hand stilled over the flames. "I wasn't owned." He looked at her, not unkindly but without pretending. "They will say you were taken." She let the words sink in. He was right. The world would not care that he had saved her life. They would see only her color and his. The realization felt like a noose tightening around her ribs. "Then what happens when they find us?" He didn't answer, only fed another log to the fire. She stared at him through the flickering light. The muscles across his shoulders moved like coiled cords when he worked. He looked unbreakable, and yet the quiet around him felt fragile, like something the world had already tried too many times to shatter. "Why did you save me?" she asked finally. He sat back, expression unreadable. "Because the land doesn't need another ghost." She wanted to argue, to say that her life wasn't worth the risk he had taken. But the way he said it, calm without pity, left no room for protest. For a long while they said nothing. The only sound was the soft pop of the fire. When he finally spoke again, it was barely above a whisper. "You have someone waiting for you?" Her voice broke on the answer. "No, not anymore." She saw the flicker in his eyes, understanding, quiet, unspoken. The fire burned low. Between them, the silence thickened, not empty this time, but full of something unnamed. Over the next days, the snow began to thaw. Patches of earth appeared between drifts. Taza showed her how to track small game, how to tell where the wind slept. She listened, eager, careful, as if the lessons were holy. She noticed things then, how his voice carried a gentleness it tried to hide, how he always walked slightly ahead of her on the trail, not to lead but to guard. At night, he hummed soft melodies, songs without words. Once she asked him what they meant. He said, "They keep the dark from growing teeth." Sometimes she caught herself staring at him too long, searching for something she couldn't name. She told herself it was gratitude. It might have been more. But peace is a fragile thing. It cracks under the weight of the world. Late one evening, while she was washing a pan in melted snow, she heard it, the faint crack of a branch beyond the ridge. She froze. Another sound followed, a horse's snort muffled by distance. Taza stepped outside, rifle in hand, eyes scanning the white horizon. "What is it?" she whispered. He didn't look at her. "Men. 3, maybe 4. Her heart began to pound. "From town?" He nodded. She took a step back, shaking. "They'll think you." "I know." He turned to her then, calm as ever, but she could see the edge of something sharp in his gaze. "You will stay inside. No fire tonight." She wanted to argue, but the weight of his certainty silenced her. She extinguished the flame, the hut falling into darkness. They waited in the cold, breath barely moving. Through the cracks in the wall, she saw faint shadows on the snow below, men on horseback, torches dim behind the trees. One voice carried faintly on the wind. She recognized it. "Sheriff Pike. Tracks lead this way," he was saying. "If she's with him, we bring her home." Her pulse thundered in her ears. Home. The word meant nothing now. Taza didn't move, didn't blink. When the voices faded, he lowered his rifle. The silence that followed was deafening. "They'll come again," he said. Evelyn swallowed hard. "Then what do we do?" He looked at her, steady, the firelight catching in his eyes though no fire burned. "We wait. And when they come, you choose which world you belong to." The word struck her harder than the cold ever had. She wanted to speak, to tell him she didn't know anymore which world was hers. But no sound came. Only the whisper of wind through the cracks, soft, relentless, patient. Outside, somewhere in the dark, a lone horse whinnied and then fell silent. Inside, the air between them felt heavy with what neither dared to name. She turned toward him, saw the faint outline of his face, and knew that nothing about the world beyond those walls would ever be simple again. And as the wind carried the last echo of hooves into the distance, Taza spoke, voice low, certain, almost tender. "They will not stop until one of us is gone." The silence that followed was no longer peace. It was the pause before a storm that knew both their names. The dawn came without color, only the faintest hint of gray breaking through the last of the storm. The mountains were still, shrouded in mist, their peaks cut sharp against the tired sky. Inside the small hut, the air was heavy with silence. Evelyn sat near the dying fire, hands wrapped around a cold tin cup, eyes fixed on the smoke curling toward the ceiling. It smelled of ash and old wood, like endings. Taza stood near the doorway, rifle slung over his shoulder, gaze trained toward the valley below. He hadn't spoken since before sunrise. The tension in him was quiet, contained, but it radiated through the room like the hum of a live wire. He had heard something before dawn, the sound of movement, of men closing in. Evelyn felt it too, though she couldn't name it. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. She rose slowly, the stiffness in her limbs reminding her of the cold that never truly left her bones. "You think it's them?" she asked. Taza didn't look back. "Yes." Her stomach twisted. "How many?" "Enough." He said it flatly, without fear or emphasis. That steadiness both comforted and terrified her. She crossed the small space and stood beside him. Through the narrow gap between the door and the frame, she saw movement far below, dark figures threading through the snow, the faint glint of metal catching what little light the dawn offered. "The posse. They'll kill you," she whispered. His expression didn't change. "They will try." Evelyn felt her pulse hammering in her throat. "Taza, if they think you took me?" He turned then, eyes locking onto hers. "You go. Now." "No," the word tore out of her before she could stop it. "I won't leave you." He studied her face, searching, maybe hoping to find something that would make her obey. But what he found instead was a stubbornness that matched his own. For a moment he closed his eyes, exhaling through his nose. When he opened them again they were softer. "They will not stop," he said quietly. "You cannot change their hearts." "Then let them see mine," she said, voice shaking but steady. Outside the wind shifted. Horses snorted. Voices cut through the air. Men shouting orders, the metallic click of rifles loading. Taza stepped away from the doorway and reached for a small pouch near the fire. From it he pulled a handful of powder and poured it into a hollowed gourd. "You stay behind me," he said. No sound. Evelyn nodded, though she could feel her whole body trembling. The first shot came without warning, a sharp crack that split the morning in two. The bullet struck the doorframe, splintering wood, throwing dust into the air. Taza didn't flinch. He moved to the window, eyes calm, counting shapes through the mist. "They surround," he said. "Fuck." maybe 6. Another shot followed, grazing the edge of the hut. Evelyn ducked instinctively, heart pounding. A voice echoed from outside, deep, commanding. "Step out, woman. Step away from that savage." She knew that voice. Sheriff Amos Pike. Her breath caught. She stumbled toward the door before Taza could stop her. "They think I'm a prisoner," she said. "I can." But before she could finish, another bullet shattered the top of the door, spraying splinters across the room. Taza pulled her down, covering her with his body. His weight was solid, warm, anchoring her against the panic that clawed inside her chest. The gunfire stopped for a moment. Then the sheriff's voice again, closer now. "Evelyn Carter. You come out right now, you hear? You don't have to die in there with him." Her name hung in the air like an accusation. Taza released her, eyes meeting hers again. "You choose now," he said. "Their world or this one." She shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. "You saved me. I'm not leaving." He stared at her for a long moment, then nodded once. It wasn't approval, but acceptance. He moved toward the door, shoulders squared. Evelyn grabbed his arm. "Please don't." His voice was calm. "There are times to run. And times to stand." Before she could speak again, he was gone, slipping out into the pale morning, rifle in hand, vanishing into the snow like a shadow that belonged there. Evelyn pressed herself against the wall, heart hammering in her ears. Through the cracks she saw him move, silent, precise, cutting between the rocks at the edge of the clearing. The men shouted when they saw him. Another shot cracked through the air. Then another. She couldn't breathe. She snatched the old rifle Taza had left leaning by the hearth. Her hands shook as she loaded a round. Outside, the fight was chaos and echo, snow kicking up in plumes, bullets striking rock, men cursing. She caught a glimpse of Taza ducking behind a boulder, returning fire with measured calm. Then she saw Sheriff Pike step forward, waving his arm. "Hold your fire," he yelled. "The woman's in there." Silence. The pause lasted only a second, but it was enough for Evelyn to hear her own heartbeat. "Evelyn," the sheriff called out, voice softer now. "Come out, girl. You don't belong with him. He's not your kind." Something inside her broke at that. Not with anger, but with a clarity she hadn't felt in years. She stepped to the door, lifted the latch, and pushed it open. The cold hit her like a slap. She walked out slowly, hands raised, rifle at her side. The men watched her, confused, tense. Sheriff Pike took a step forward, his breath visible in the morning air. "Evelyn, what in God's name are you doing?" She looked past him, at the men behind him, at their rifles, at the fear hiding behind their bravado. Then her gaze found Taza crouched near the rocks, blood staining his shoulder, steam rising from the wound. Her voice trembled, but her words were clear. "He didn't take me. He saved me." The sheriff blinked as if her words didn't fit the world he knew. "You don't understand what you're saying." "I understand enough." She lowered her hands, bringing the rifle up, not to fire, but to hold it steady between herself and the world. "He gave me bread," she said, voice gaining strength. "When no one else even remembered I existed. When your men would have let me die out there." One of the younger deputies, Clive Barnes, shifted nervously. "Ma'am, you—" "Put the gun down," the sheriff ordered. She didn't move. "No." Another shot rang out, wild, from one of the men behind the sheriff. It hit Taza in the leg, spinning him backward into the snow. Evelyn screamed and ran toward him, dropping to her knees beside him. Blood pooled beneath his thigh, steaming against the frozen ground. His jaw clenched, breath ragged. "You're hurt," she said, pressing her hands to the wound. He looked at her, pain clouding his eyes. "Go." She shook her head. "Not without you." The sheriff approached slowly, rifle still in his grip. "Evelyn, move aside." She didn't. "You'll have to shoot me first." The wind picked up, scattering the sound of boots crunching snow. For a long moment, no one moved. Taza tried to rise, but she held him down, eyes never leaving the sheriff's. Something passed between them, recognition maybe. He had known her father once, years ago. He had seen that same defiance in him. Finally, Pike lowered his rifle. "Let it be," he said softly. "Ain't no law worth killing kindness." He turned away. The others hesitated, confused, but when he spoke again, louder this time, they obeyed. "Mount up." The men began to retreat, their shapes fading back into the white haze. When the last sound of hooves disappeared, Evelyn let out a breath that felt torn from her very soul. Taza lay still, eyes closed, breath shallow. She tore a strip from her cloak and bound his leg, hands shaking but sure. "You'll live," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if it was truth or prayer. He opened his eyes, faint but focused. You could have gone. I told you, she said, voice breaking. You gave me bread. I'm giving you my name. For the first time, a faint smile touched his lips. Then speak it. She leaned closer, brushing the snow from his face. Evelyn Carter, she whispered. And you, Taza. That's your name. I'll remember it when the rest forget. The wind softened, the storm finally dying with the dawn. Light spilled weakly across the valley, glinting off the snow like 1,000 shattered mirrors. She helped him sit up, her arm around his shoulders. The world was quiet again, save for the distant cry of a hawk cutting through the silence. He looked toward the east, toward the first thin edge of sunlight. The storm is over, he said. She followed his gaze. For now. The fire in her chest burned warm against the cold. But even as she said it, she knew peace was temporary. The town would not forget. The whispers would come. And when they did, the two of them would have to face what mercy had cost. Still, in that fragile morning, she chose not to fear. She reached out, took his hand and pressed it to her chest. You're not alone anymore, she said. He looked at her then, really looked, as though seeing the thing he'd never dared to hope for. And in his silence, there was something like promise. Above them, the first true light of morning broke across the snow, red as blood, bright as forgiveness. Evelyn closed her eyes and let it warm her face. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel cold. But far below, beyond the ridge, a lone rider lingered, Clive Barnes, the young deputy, watching them from the distance. He turned his horse toward town, his face pale, his jaw tight. By the time he reached the valley floor, his decision had already been made. Spring crept in quietly, as if afraid to disturb the ghosts winter left behind. The snow melted in slow sighs, turning to thin rivers that whispered through the pines. The mountains, once white and merciless, now shimmered green under the sun's gentle hand. The world seemed to breathe again. Evelyn knelt beside a shallow stream, washing the blood-stained cloth she had used to bind Taza's wound. The water ran clear, carrying away what the storm had written into their lives. Behind her, smoke rose from the rebuilt hut, thin, straight, peaceful. She could hear him inside, his movements slower than before but steady, mending a snare with the same precision he once used to prepare for battle. He was healing. So was she. The days had grown long and kind. The forest, once their prison, had become their refuge. Birds sang again in the mornings, and Evelyn learned to recognize their calls by heart. She had begun to laugh softly at her own mistakes. Burned bread, crooked stitching, the way her hands trembled when she first tried to light a fire alone. Every small success felt like defiance against the cold that had once claimed everything she loved. Taza spoke little still, but his silence had changed. It was no longer the silence of distance. It was the silence of knowing, of being seen without needing words. Sometimes, when she caught him watching her through the smoke, she wondered if he felt the same fragile warmth that now bloomed in her chest. One afternoon, she found him sitting on a fallen log, carving something into a strip of bark. She approached quietly, wiping her hands on her apron. What are you making? He didn't look up. A name. She tilted her head. Yours? He nodded. You said I should write it. He handed her the piece of bark. The letters were uneven but strong, carved with the care of someone building a bridge between worlds. Taza. She smiled, tracing the grooves with her fingertip. Looks right. He studied her for a moment, then asked, You write? Used to, she said softly. Before the war my father taught me. Said words were the only thing that lasted. He nodded slowly. Then write yours beside mine. Her chest tightened. She took the knife, hesitated, then carved, slowly, carefully, Evelyn. The two names sat side by side, imperfect but eternal. When she finished, he looked at the bark, then at her. Now it means something, he said. She tried to speak, but her throat closed around the words. All she could manage was a small, broken smile. That evening, they shared the last of the winter provisions, cornbread, a strip of smoked rabbit, and a few berries she had gathered from the thawed earth. The firelight turned the air golden. Outside, the sky was painted in streaks of violet and orange. For a time they said nothing. The quiet was full, rich, alive. Then Taza spoke. They will come again. The words struck like cold water. She set her tin cup down, careful not to spill. You're sure? He nodded. The young one. The deputy. He looked back when the others left. He will not forget. Evelyn's stomach nodded. Then we run. He shook his head. If we run, they will follow. If we stay, we choose how it ends. She looked into his eyes, searching for fear, but found none. Only calm, the kind that comes when a man has already made peace with death. Do you want to fight? She asked. No, his voice was low, certain. But I will not be hunted. Her hands trembled in her lap. I don't want to lose you. He turned toward her, the firelight catching the faint scar along his jaw. You will not. They sat there until the stars burned awake, neither moving, neither yielding to sleep. By morning the world had gone still again, too still. The birds had vanished. The wind carried a sound Evelyn hadn't heard in weeks, the soft clink of bridles, the creak of saddle leather. Taza was already at the door, rifle in hand. His voice was calm. They are close. Evelyn grabbed her cloak, heart hammering. We can hide. He cut her off gently. No. We stand. Through the trees, shapes emerged, 5 riders, faces half-shadowed by the rising sun. At their front rode Deputy Clive Barnes, his expression torn between duty and dread. Taza, Evelyn whispered. He gave no answer, only stepped forward into the clearing, rifle lowered but ready. The riders halted. Clive dismounted slowly, one hand raised. You need to come with us, he called. The sheriff, he says there's trouble brewing. Folks talk. Evelyn stepped beside Taza. You came for me, not him. Clive's gaze shifted to her, pained. You don't understand, ma'am. There's a price on him now. They'll send others if I don't bring him in. Taza spoke evenly. You can tell them I am dead. The deputy hesitated. They won't believe me. Then make them. Clive's jaw tightened. I can't. Something in him broke then. The young man who had once followed orders now trapped between conscience and command. He looked at Evelyn, desperation shining in his eyes. Please just come back to town. We can sort this out. Evelyn's voice trembled, but her words were clear. Town let me starve. The wilderness fed me. Tell your men to leave. Clive's expression hardened. If I don't bring him, they'll send worse. Taza took a step forward. Then you will have to choose, same as me. The air tightened, heavy as thunder before rain. Clive raised his rifle, hands shaking. Don't make me do this. Evelyn's cry cracked through the silence. Stop. But the gun fired, one sharp, final sound that shattered the morning. Taza staggered back, the bullet grazing his side. He caught himself, one hand pressing against the wound. Evelyn ran to him, blood blooming through her fingers as she tried to hold him steady. No, she whispered. Not again. Clive stood frozen, the rifle slipping from his grip. His face was pale, horrified. He moved, I didn't mean. Taza's breath came shallow but even. You still can choose, he said, looking at Clive. The deputy swallowed hard. His gaze flicked between them, then to the men behind him, waiting for orders. He turned back to his horse. Go, he said roughly. Both of you. Now. Evelyn blinked through tears. You'll tell them we're dead? He nodded. I'll tell them I buried you myself. Taza rose slowly, leaning on her shoulder. He gave Clive a single nod of gratitude, an exchange that said more than any words could. They turned toward the trees, moving together through the dappled light. Behind them, the men watched in stunned silence as the deputy raised his rifle and fired twice into the air, echoing the sound of death that wasn't. By the time the smoke cleared, they were gone. The two of them walked until the world grew wide again, until the mountains gave way to valleys and the wind smelled of wildflowers. When they finally stopped, Taza sank to his knees beside a stream, exhaustion etching lines across his face. Evelyn knelt beside him, pressing her forehead to his shoulder. You'll live, she whispered. He looked at her, a faint smile tugging his lips. Then we go where the whisper cannot follow. She nodded. They sat in silence, listening to the water's quiet song. Above them, the sky burned gold with morning. Evelyn reached for his hand and traced the scar on his palm. Say my name, she said softly. He met her gaze. Evelyn. She smiled through the tears that finally came. And yours. He hesitated, then said it as if offering a prayer. Taza. Their names hung in the air, carried by the wind across the thawed earth. Two sounds bound together, echoing long after the world forgot the rest. And when the sun broke fully over the horizon, it found them standing side by side, hand in hand, walking toward the light that awaited them beyond the valley.